When we are okay. All right. Thank you for joining Georgia Transplant Foundation for our first virtual Heart Trends in Transplant Conference. We want to thank CareDx for being our presenting sponsor and thank Community, a Walgreens pharmacy, and Synergen RX for being our virtual sponsors. I'm Deb Long, the coordinator of the Mentor Project and the Trends in Transplant conferences at Georgia Transplant Foundation. While the pandemic has posed many challenges for meeting in person, as we usually would for conferencing, we're excited to offer you these amazing programs virtually today. Here's a quick look at the agenda for today. We're going to kick off with a review of programs and services of GTF. Then we will hear a story of a heart transplant recipient. Next, we will have a psychologist speak about flourishing during the pandemic. And lastly, we will wrap up with two amazing transplant physicians to share their knowledge and answer questions today. We have some general housekeeping I'm going to review. We are being recorded today, and we will share our presentations on our website for future viewing. We will send you a follow-up email with all of the recordings after this day. So just be aware that as we're being recorded, the speaker is spotlighted, so only they will show up in the recording, but your voice will be on the recording if you choose to unmute and speak to answer a question or ask a question or to participate in any way. We encourage you to ask questions by typing them into the chat box to everyone. That is at the bottom of the page. And other than asking a question or participating, we ask that you stay muted so any background noise doesn't disturb the presentations. When you receive the email with the links to the presentations, you'll also be sent a survey about today's conference. We urge you to answer the questions in the survey as it will help us decide what we do for our future conference programming. We do want this to feel as close to an in-person conference as possible. So if you want to reach out to another participant during the conference in a personal chat, we encourage you to do so. And we will also leave the conference open after the final speakers. If you want to stick around for general conversation or questions to the GTF staff, it's been very fun to do that at the end of the conferences. So we kind of consider it our hallway chat that we would have at the live conferences. We have lots of resources available on our website, including information about all of our programs. And we would encourage you to like and follow us on Facebook, where we post regularly about all of our upcoming events. We definitely want to note that it's important that you always defer to your own transplant physician and team for questions related to your health. They are the experts on your personal health and wellness. And to get us started today, we have two questions to give us an idea of who is here. And the first question is going to pop up. Please describe yourself. Are you a candidate, a recipient, a caregiver, a professional, or something else? And we'll just leave it open for a couple more seconds. It looks like, and this is generally how it goes, we have the most recipients here today. And everything else is it's 12% for everything else. So we have the smaller caregiver, professional, and transplant candidates. So we welcome you all. And we have one more question today. Let's see, it'll pop up. All right, and how long have you had your transplant? Less than 6 months. Usually we do this in when we do it in person, we have everybody stand up, and the people who've had their transplant the longest, we hear from them. Wow, we have so far a lot who have had their transplant for more than 15 years. So if that is you and you'd like to share how long you've had your transplant, you could unmute we have, it looks like 4 people who've had their transplant for more than 15 years. So if you want to add it in the chat box, or if you want to unmute and share how long you've had your transplant, we would welcome you to do that.
Joe Scott, I've had my transplant almost 25.
Wow, that's so great. Thanks, Joe, for sharing. Does anyone else want to share?
All right, unmute.
You're unmuted.
13 months.
Oh, 13 months. Okay, well, thank you. You're one of the newer ones.
Yeah, lucky.
Thank you. Anyone else have 15 or more years that would like to share?
I'm 19 with my first one.
Awesome.
So I count that, even though the second one's only 10, but the first one was 19.
That's great. Thanks, Cheryl.
I'm at 17 years and counting.
All right. That's amazing. Well, thank you everyone for sharing. I am next going to introduce to you the Director of Patient Services, Rebecca Moshiri, who will review the programs and services of Georgia Transplant Foundation.
Good morning, everybody. I'm so glad to see you here. We really appreciate you coming today. And I want to make sure that you know about all the programs that GTF has to offer. So the Georgia Transplant Foundation was founded in 1992 by Tommy Smith, who was a transplant recipient. Now we offer a lot of programs and services, financial assistance, the Transplant Fundraising Program, and education and community programs. First, I'll tell you a little bit about our financial assistance programs. Patients who are working to get listed or who are already UNOS listed at a transplant center and are Georgia residents are eligible to apply for assistance if there's a situation of need related to transplant. First, I'll tell you about the programs that we have to offer for pre-transplant patients. Our dental assistance program may be able to help if your transplant center is required to get dental clearance. We also offer assistance with insurance premiums for non-Medicare UNOS listed patients who are currently missing work due to progression of their disease. We have an evaluation assistance program that may be able to help with travel and lodging costs if you're getting evaluated for transplant far from home. And then we also have a program to assist living donors with travel costs and lost wages. Now I'll tell you about our programs for post-transplant patients. Our emergency assistance programs help with household bills if there's an income loss that's related to transplant. We offer short-term medication assistance to make sure that you can always take your meds while you work with your social worker to plan on how you're going to cover it moving forward. And that could be that you have a deductible to meet, or maybe you need to apply for some of the pharmaceutical assistance programs. We can help with lodging if you live far from your transplant center, while the transplant team wants you to stay locally after your transplant or for follow-up visits. And we offer assistance with health insurance premiums many times during a time of job loss or transition. We offer transportation assistance to help with the fuel for traveling back and forth to the center for follow-up just after transplant surgery when you have so many follow-up visits. So the important thing to remember about all of these programs is that the way that you apply is to go through your transplant social worker. You would contact the social worker, talk about the situation, and they can help you with the application, and your social worker would submit it to GTF. Next, I'd like to tell you about our Transplant Fundraising program. So this program is set up to help patients prepare financially for all of the ongoing transplant costs that you'll have post-transplant. It includes fundraising and a matched grant. We can match up to $10,000 that you raise. In order to be eligible, you must be approved pre-transplant for the matched fund program. Once you're fully enrolled in the program, you have 1 year to fundraise, and then we will match the amount that you raised in that 1 year. So the funds for the matched program can be used primarily for post-transplant prescription medications and your post-transplant insurance premiums. To get more information about the Transplant Fundraising Program, you can go to our website, and we also have a virtual copy of a video of our fundraising workshop. You can apply through the GTF website or talk to your transplant social worker at your center, because they also can help you through the application process for it. And our website is gatransplant.org if you'd like to look for more information there. Next slide, please. We also offer many education and community programs. We have the Jumpstart program, which is one that helps you to return to work or transition to employment. That's available for recipients, caregivers, and living donors. We have the Mentor Project, which I think many of you are already involved in. And it's a program where we match trained recipients with transplant candidates or caregivers to kind of talk to them about what transplant looks like and living after transplant. We also offer TNT conferences, just like the one you're attending today. This year, they have looked very different due to COVID. We've been able to offer them virtually. Usually we travel around the state to different cities and offer them in person. And we hope to get back to that at some point, but we are excited to offer a TNT conference for all organs again this year in December. So we hope that you'll look for information and attend it as well. For children who are going through transplant, we also offer a tutoring assistance program. And then on an annual basis, we offer academic scholarships. And these are for students who are seeking post-high school education or training. And then additionally, we have a couples enrichment weekend, because we know that the whole transplant process can put a lot of pressure on long-term relationships. So the enrichment weekend is a time for the couple to focus again on their relationship and their goals for it, and you know, make the focus not completely be on transplant and on staying well. We hope to offer that again next year in 2022. So if you'd like more information about it, please feel free to look on our website. Next slide, please. So for more information on all of these programs and to get the actual applications to apply for programs, you can go to the webpage, gatransplant.org. So next, we're going to have another poll question. We would like to know which city in Georgia do you live the closest to? We just want to know where everybody's from who's here today. So it looks like we have tons of representation from Atlanta, one person in Savannah, one near Augusta. Wow, so the great majority of people who are here today are from Atlanta. Oh, okay, somebody said in the chat that they live in Florida. We're glad you're here. Well, next, I would like to introduce you to our next speaker, Dr. Arthur Vaughn. He is a heart transplant recipient and also a mentor for GTF. And we can't wait to hear your story.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you all this morning. I wanted to take a moment to thank the Georgia Transplant Foundation for having me. And also, and I can't tell, can you see the screen I shared? My screen looks.
We sure can.
All right, because my screen was looking funny for a second.
Oh.
All right, so I'm happy to be here, and thank you to the Georgia Transplant Foundation, Deb Long, and everybody else for inviting me to be here today. And I want to let you know how much I appreciate all of you being here, people who may be waiting on a transplant or have had a transplant, because I know it's Saturday morning and you could be doing anything else but listening to me talk. I'm a 2019 heart transplant recipient, and I'm going to briefly tell you a little bit about my story and how things went. And if you have any questions, we can definitely discuss them. Please put them in the chat. And I was told that someone will pull them up and we'll talk about them. But in 2019, in June, I had just finished 3 really great trips traveling to Vegas and Mississippi and New York. Came back and ran my 8th Peachtree Road Race in a row. Played around the golf. I tend to play golf several times a week. My scores don't reflect that, but I do. And a few days later, I went back to work and I couldn't figure out what was wrong. I couldn't breathe. My breathing was labored and I was struggling to breathe. And I listened to my body, and I always tell people to listen to your body. Our bodies tell us so many wonderful things if we only listen. And I went and saw my primary care physician. And he said, I need you to see a cardiologist. And I said, well, I have a good friend who's a cardiologist here in Metro Atlanta. Let me call him. And the next day I went and saw my cardiologist, and this is now July 10th. And he put, the cardiac stress test. He put me through that. We did that. And about 3 minutes into the stress test, I'm jumping off the treadmill and running into the restroom because it was time to lose my cookies. All right. And I'm thinking, I just ran the Peachtree Road Race. I'm in fairly good shape. What is going on? And he calls me back in the room. And then I call my wife at the time. And she comes, she's only 5 minutes from the cardiologist's office. And he explains to me that I'm in heart failure and that my EF is at 20%. And he has no idea how I got through the Peachtree Road Race and around the golf. And he tells me, I'm going to admit you to the hospital today. And his office is right by St. Joe's. So we leave his office and immediately go to St. Joe's. And as you can imagine, and many of you probably have gone through, when you get that news, your mind's racing. You're like, am I going to die? Or did he just tell me I'm going to die? I can't breathe. All these things are going on. And I get to St. Joe's and I go to the ER where they tell me to go check in, and no one seems to know why I'm there. Even though he told me he was going to call over, so they knew I was there and they'd be ready for me when I got there. But no one at St. Joe's seems to know why I'm there. Long story short, because I don't want to, go and bore you with all the details. I'm at St. Joe's and they're trying to treat me. And if you look at the picture I shared on the upper left-hand image is a gentleman that's leaning over to me, and I'm in the hospital bed, and that's me at St. Joe's, and I'm in denial because he's telling, I know they just told me that I have this EF of 20, and I understand what that means. And I know I can't breathe, but, some of my friends come over to the hospital and I'm talking to them about, our golfing the next week and where we're going to go play and all these things. And the physicians and the nurses are looking at me like, does he get it? Does he understand what's going on right now? He's not going to be playing golf next week or anytime soon. So I stay at St. Joe's and I'm not getting any better. And things are getting worse, and realization is starting to set in. And then my EF drops some more. And if you look at the lower right-hand picture, that's when the guys come and airlift me from St. Joe's to Emory, the most expensive 20-minute flight in my life. But even then, I'm still in a bit of denial. I'm taking a picture with the helicopter guys, and because this is my first helicopter ride, and they're flying me to Emory, but I'm still in a bit of denial. I really don't understand the gravity of what's going on, or I haven't received it yet. It hasn't taken root. But they airlift me over to Emory, and within hours of me being at Emory, they take me in and I get a pacemaker put in, you know, and a defibrillator, and they put a balloon pump in my leg, and I, you know, it's starting to click that you know, this is serious for me. So not long after getting the balloon pump and a defibrillator and such, I hear all these lights and whistles and bells going off in my room, and it's all the machinery, right? Because my heart's starting, the beats per minute are rising quickly. And it's the first time that, you know, this pacemaker goes off and it pops, and I jump up and put together curse words that I didn't even know went together. And I'm, you know, because the pain and the shock and just I'm like, what is going on now? And it's now it's real for me. And then, you know, through that process, they end up having to put me back in and get rid of the balloon pump because it won't work, and put in an impella in my right leg, because it's one of the few impellas Emory has. If they have more than 3, I don't believe they do. And I'm progressively getting worse. And my EF is dropping to 9, and I'm in and out of consciousness. And I feel like I'm telling my kids that, you know, take care of your mom, dad's not going to be here. I feel like I told my brother who came to town and my sister that. And remember, I went in on June 10th. I mean, excuse me, July 10th. And 9 days later, we're in, and, you know, they cardioverted me. He said at least 30 times. He said it was happening so often, he couldn't write it down. They couldn't chart it and do it because it was happening so often. So 9 days in, we're going through the steps to get on the list for transplant. We're going through step after step, and I'm listening, and I can hear things going on around me, and my family is doing everything they asked for. You need what paperwork, and they're filling it out, and they're completing it, and they're making sure it gets done. But I can hear that in the room next door, the person's arguing with them about why you need this paperwork and why you need that. And in my mind, I'm like, who cares why they need it? Give them the paperwork so your loved one can get a heart. And I'm so happy that mine aren't doing that. And I remember the Monday meetings. I remember my family started calling them, you know, they said they were like TMZ when they would all get together in the morning and the docs would huddle around and talk about my case. They started referring to them like TMZ and this group of people that are just talking. But 9 days later, I'm on the list. Like, you know, they've checked my medical records and all of these things, but I'm still, you know, in and out, and limited families coming by. And on June 19th, I'm on a transplant list. And then that's about the time when I find out why I'm here, because I was like, I was presumably healthy and now I'm not. And they tell me I have this thing called giant cell myocarditis. And I was like, you know, me being the inquisitive person that I am and the researcher that I am, I said, what is this giant cell myocarditis? So I grabbed my phone and start looking it up. And essentially it's like a virus entered my body and told my immune system that my native heart's not my heart. So my immune system starts attacking this once healthy heart, and it's doing it rapidly. And then I learned that most people who have giant cell myocarditis, they don't find out you have it until autopsy, because it just takes over so quickly. It's like many other viruses. And for me, it's what I think of when I think of COVID, and it just attacks you so quickly that so many people go from being fairly presumably healthy, or whatever level of health they were in, to extremely sick so quickly. But I'm laying on this table and I'm like, what's going on? And this hospital bed becomes this place of death, and some place I don't want to be. And it represents all these negative things for me, because it represents that I might not be here anymore. So on the 19th, I get on this list, and on the 23rd, Dr. David Vega, who's in the center photo, he comes in and he says, Arthur, I'm fairly certain, I'm 99% certain I have a heart for you. We sent the jet to go get it. And, you know, out of all of that, what I heard is, Emory's got a jet? Oh my God, Emory, they're wonderful. I'm like, they have a jet. And I heard the heart part, but I'm laughing because I was like, they have a jet. That's pretty fancy. So the next day or later that night, they rolled me into the operating room. And many of you who may have gone through transplant already understand that you roll you in on that cold bed and you're laying flat, and it's probably one of the most uncomfortable beds you've ever laid in, because it's this long metal cold bed. And 10 hours later, I wake up and I have a new heart. So I was on the list for 14 days. Excuse me, I was in the hospital for 14 days before I had a new heart, but only on the list for 4. So Emory began calling me their miracle patient, because they said they've never had anybody that was only on the list for 4 days before they got a heart. And my friends and family are like, "What senator did you call?" I was like, "I didn't call anybody. But God." It's like it had nothing to do with me. But that's where the trauma begins for me. I wake up and with the ventilator, down on a ventilator with the tube down my throat, my arm strapped down. And like many people, I wake up and I'm like, I can't talk, and I'm trying to pull myself out of, away from this ventilator machine. And that's where I tell people my mental health challenges began, right? Because I got so sick so quickly. I didn't have time, like some people, to process and just go through these various stages of grief and processing all that's going on. I'm going from relatively healthy to incredibly sick in what feels like to me in days and hours. And then I hear what I say, and the angel come whisper in my ear when I'm losing it. And again, it was my wife at the time and came whispered in my ear. And women, you have this power over us like no one else. Men, we can be losing it and we can be crazy. And she just came and whispered in my ear. The doctors had already been telling me everything I needed to do to get this tube out, but I couldn't hear them because I'm just trying to pull my way out of this thing. And she just leans over and whispers in my ear and tells me, "Hey, I need you to relax. If you do this, this, and this, the tube can come out and the strains can come off." And my body immediately went numb, and I relaxed and closed my eyes and just laid there in peace. And they were able to take the tube out. Okay? But it took that. And then that first night, I didn't go to sleep because in my mind, I couldn't sleep. I was afraid if I went to sleep, what hadn't registered that I had a new heart, that my heart and my body was now 30 years younger than me. All I remembered was the native heart, the failing heart. And I was afraid if I went to sleep, I wasn't going to wake up. So I didn't sleep that whole first night. And the next morning, the doctors came in and they were like, "Are you okay? If there's anything you need." And I burst out screaming and yelling, talking about, "I need help. I need help. I need help." And I'm screaming and crying and I'm losing it. And I tell people that was probably my first mental break. I just couldn't process all that I had gone through and all that was going on. And when I looked back, I think I was screaming, "I need God, I need God, I need God," because I couldn't deal with everything that was happening. And I couldn't see anybody. I wasn't ready to see family. I wasn't ready to see anybody the limited list of people who could come in, because mentally I just couldn't deal with any of it. I wanted to get out of this deathbed, the bed that represented nothing but illness for me over the last 2 weeks. And it was a struggle. And it took another day before I was willing to see people and I could deal with it. I thought I told my children I was gone. I thought I told family members that I was gone. And then again, my family tells me that never happened. My wife at the time said, she grabbed me by the sides of my face, again, like only you ladies can do. And when I'm losing it, and said, "Hey, I need you to calm down." She said it again. "And I'm going to tell you what happened and what didn't happen. And you're going to stop this." And she explained to me all the things that didn't happen. She said, "You never had any conversations with the girls about you leaving." That conversation didn't, but in my mind I had it and it was real for me. But she said that conversation never took place because she hadn't left the hospital from the time I was admitted until transplant. She never left. She was there 24 hours a day, sleeping on that hard bed outside the room, there for every conference, every TMZ conference in the morning with the physicians. She had never left. She'd go take a shower in the hospital and eat in the hospital. But we were so blessed that so much food came every day. We were able to feed everybody on the ICU ward. It was like Thanksgiving every day. because people kept sending in food. And we was like, the other families that I might have been struggling or figuring out, where they're going to, can they sleep or eat because they can't do both because maybe their situations were different. We said, let's bless everybody on this floor. We got all this food showing up every day that can't be given to me, right? So let's feed everybody on the ward, the doctors, the nurses, the other families, and make sure everybody's taken care of. There would be a family that didn't know where they were going to sleep that night. And I would tell her, get my credit card and put them in a hotel. And she said, huh? I said, it's okay. We'll be okay. A night in the hotel is not going to, if we're at that point, I got bigger problems. We'll be okay. But through this process, and even when I came home, I remember that when I left the hospital, the first thing I wanted to do was sit outside Emory while I was waiting for the car to come and have the sun on your face, right? Just feeling the warmth of the August sun, because at this point it's the beginning of August. And even before I get there, the photos I'm sharing, I referred to the nurses as heroes in navy blue, because I would ask them questions in the middle of the night because I'd never slept well. When I was finally moved to the floor, I didn't want to sleep in the hospital bed because, again, it represented death to me. So I wanted to sleep in the chair. And I'd stay up at night talking to the nurses. And I called them heroes in navy blue, because they would take you at the worst point of your life and nurse you back to health. Or the technicians that taught me how to walk again. And I said, what do you mean teach me how to walk again? But I didn't realize how much your body atrophies. And I couldn't imagine the people who are in the beds for longer periods of time, waiting for a heart, and what it does to their body and how it ravages their body from just laying there. And I got home, and then I needed more mental health care because I still wasn't okay. I went through a lot of challenges. I won't go through them all today, but there were a lot of challenges. There continues to be challenges. I thought I was good. I was readmitted in the hospital twice in the fall after my transplant because my body went through rejection. And when I went through rejection, all the gains I had physically and any gains I had mentally went out the window. Because in my mind, I was like, I can't do this again. I can't go through this again. You're telling me I'm in rejection. I'm saying this organ is failing. I can't go through another transplant procedure. I can't do this again. And it became really difficult. And I got what I termed survivor's remorse. And I was like, I'm here, but how do I deal with the fact that somebody else's child had to die so I could live? I was 50 at the time. How did this 20-year-old, somebody lost their 20-year-old child so I could live? And how unfair that seemed in my mind. And I struggled with that. So the physical struggle wasn't as bad for me as the mental struggle. Physically, I was like, I'm learning I'm walking again. I'm getting out, even though, it was difficult, but the emotional struggle was so much more for me than the physical. Going through rejection, dealing with the failing marriage, because my marriage crumpled and completely disintegrated at that time. Me trying to process the fact that this is as tough on the families as it is on the transplant recipient, because they go through so much emotionally as well. They go through some of the same cycles. Am I about to lose a family member that I love, a spouse that I made a commitment to? Children, are they going to lose a father, and all this care? And then seeing you in a way that my children saw me in a weakened state that they'd never seen before. So they had their own challenges and struggles, and how do we all do that together? And we weren't able to do it together. We failed at that part. But I would take and look at research and read. I like to read and I like to write. And I said, well, I'm going to write this book and hopefully it'll become a blessing to other people. So I would meet with my nurses and find out everything that happened and start documenting things, right? And then through the process, just journal. Journal became a mental health tool for me. It became a strategy. When I was feeling bad in the middle of the night, or I was feeling bad in the middle of the day, I would just open up my book and just start handwriting things. What was I feeling? What was going on? When I'd go to the doctor's appointments, I documented and just try to deal and learn how to work through all these things. I'm a big proponent in therapy. as men sometimes, and I've never been a woman, so I can't speak to the ladies, but for men, sometimes we're told, toughen up, suck it up. Men don't cry. We have to be tough through the whole thing. And I tell people, it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to be weak. So I would go through those processes, and I'm a religious person. So gospel music became a source of strength for me. Songs like More Than I Can Bear by Kurt Franklin, or My Testimony by Marvin Sapp. These songs became places and spaces where in the middle of the night, when I was going through the different emotional trials, I could turn to those songs and that music. It didn't stop me from crying. It didn't stop me from feeling the way I did, but it did give me some level of comfort that God had a plan for me. I might not know what it is, but it's a plan for me. He didn't bring me this far to just bring me this far. There was going to be another step. And I'm still learning 2 years out what that plan is. I don't know what the plan is yet, but part of the plan was to speak to folks like you all, and hopefully provide some hope and inspiration that, we all can still be here, and we all will still be here. It was to become a mentor. And even if I only have 1 or 2 contacts with somebody on the waiting list, and if that's all they need, and if that can be help, I'll do that. A week ago today, I was at a funeral for a friend who had a kidney transplant. He had the transplant. He came home on a Friday. We spoke on a Tuesday. Oh, excuse me, we spoke on a Monday. And that Tuesday morning, I get a call at 10 a.m. telling me he passed away. I fell out the chair crying and upset. I just couldn't believe it. I said, I just spoke to him yesterday. He had all these plans about how he was going to go and go and meet with people who were on wait list for kidney, how he was going to go do all this service and help others that were where he was, which is what I was doing. But now he was gone, which made me worry again and get in my own head, which I tend to do, about this heart in my body, and and understanding why it was a different organ, what that had to have felt like, what he was going through before he ultimately passed away. But my story is one of hope, but it's also one of challenge, and the challenge isn't over yet. I'm still going through what I call the healing power of faith. It still presents challenges all the time. Some days I tell people I have great days and I have bad days. I have days when all the drugs in my body make it hard for me to function. I get generalized weakness and I get tired and I get depressed. And I'll share these things because I don't mind. Just the other day, today's Saturday, Thursday, my therapist told me, Arthur, you're suffering from severe depression. Again, because at one point I went through major depressive disorder to severe depression. And she is working with me to get through these things. And I don't know, some people go through it in different ways and we all handle this process differently. But for me, these are things, the ups and downs of every day that I go through, and some days are amazing and some days are absolutely horrible. Some days I'll go play golf and feel like my old self, and some days I struggle to get out of the bed. And unfortunately, the bad days are more frequent than the good days. But I still have hope because I'm still here. And there's still people like you all, and still people like the Georgia Transplant Foundation that say, hey, come speak with people, come do some work, be useful. Because so I do that. I do these things because I was like, if I'm going to be here, I'm going to help somebody else. I'm going to be a blessing to somebody however I can. But I'm always thrilled, and in my prayers, I'm always thankful for this heart I have. I didn't have to get it. There are any number of people on that floor that also needed a heart, but for whatever reason, this was the one for me. And I never lose sight of that, and I never lose hope. So even through my survivor's remorse, I remember that why I'm here, and that I'm still here, and that we all, however long we're going to be here, we have work to do, and we have a purpose. And like I said earlier, he didn't bring us this far to bring us just this far. So I'm going to end with that. And if there are any questions or any discussion we want to have, I'd love to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Vaughn. You guys can use the chat box, or you are welcome to unmute and ask Dr. Vaughn any questions. I know that I really appreciated your, your real talk about there's still hard days and there's still days that are better than others. And I think everybody can relate to that. Any questions? I can, oh.
I just wanted to say that I really appreciate your testimony. I'm a year and maybe a year, 6 months out with my transplant. I had a lot of complications, and it was very hard. I didn't realize how hard it was going to be emotionally and mentally to press through all of those things. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I first started taking the medicine, and I was, my sister also has had a transplant. It's genetic for us. And I was like, what is happening? I feel like I'm losing my mind. I just felt so not like myself, like a shell of who I used to be. But yet I was very grateful for being there. But yet I didn't feel well at the same time, mentally or physically, but it's just good to hear that, I'm not the only one, or my sister's not the only one that feels that way. I think it's really powerful, and I really appreciate your transparency.
No problem. Thank you.
I know, Dr. Vaughn, I appreciate usually the stories that we have shared, or the common theme is more a lot of longer waiting. And it sounds like yours happened so quickly that a lot of your hard time was actually after transplant. So it's just a really interesting and different perspective. And I appreciate you sharing about that, because I think sometimes we forget that after transplant can be sometimes just as challenging as before transplant in different ways. But I do want to just also mention that that's why we have mentors, and you can get a mentor after transplant too. It's not just for before transplant. So a lot of times mentor requests can come through, and just because you're post-transplant doesn't mean you don't need a mentor. So I always like to point that out for anybody who just wants to connect and chat and support somebody else after transplant too.
Deb, it's Denise. Hi. Dr. Vaughn, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Second, Arthur is good.
Oh. Okay, Arthur. Okay, Arthur.
Okay, cool.
No, thank you so much for sharing your story. I see a lot of my heart buddies here, Cheryl and Dick, Joe and Judy. So hello from Florida. I think we all share a lot of what you have shared with regard to the depression, possibly having some remorse afterwards. Why am I living? Why did, not that I thought it, but a lot of people think, why did someone have to die for me? And we know that that's really not the case, yeah. But still you have those feelings. One of the things that I know that I work with down here in Florida with heart patients and with many doctors, and I do some work internationally as well, is that there is a tendency for those in the medical profession to treat within their specialty. So a cardiologist is going to treat you for your heart. A nephrologist will teach you because of your deal with your kidney issues. And there seems to be a tremendous need for those within the medical profession to really look at us holistically. And it's body, mind, and spirit. And you mentioned, how you are a spiritual person and how you look at that, and emotions absolutely can get the better of us. And I'm wondering, and Deb, I guess this is directed to you and Rebecca, that what can we do as patients to really bring to the forefront the need for, and if we want to call it mental health care or emotional health care, or just looking at the patient holistically. Treating the physical is very well done in many cases. We are all testimony to that. What is really necessary, and thank goodness for the mentor program, but I think it goes deeper than that, that there is a need within the medical profession to really look at the patient and say, what are their emotional and spiritual needs and mental needs post-transplant. That is consistently the quandary that we run into. I work with an organization called the Mended Hearts, and we do peer-to-peer support for cardiac patients. So they aren't all transplant, obviously, but they're heart patients. And anytime you've had your chest cracked open for whatever the reason, it's traumatic. It's very traumatic. And I'm just curious, Georgia Transplant Foundation does an incredible job with the mentor program, but how can we as patients get the medical profession to really look closer at the need being that for emotional and mental health?
Hey, Denise, before Deb goes, can I briefly make a comment about that?
Sure.
So there's a couple of things that I've learned through this process, right? One, our doctors don't talk to each other, and that sucks. I sit there and say, I have these medical things, and I'm with the amazing transplant coordinators at Emory, and I love them dearly. But they're looking to say, okay, my heart function is okay. Then I have a primary care physician that's looking at some, your general health, and then a therapist that's looking at mental health. But at no point do these people communicate, and each one of these things can affect the other.
Right.
There's no central repository where all of that comes together. And I've mentioned it to each of them, and I've gone as far as getting them all on one Zoom call and signing HIPAA forms. So I was like, I need y'all to talk to each other, because each one of you are treating a part of me, but part of me is all of me, right? Each of these parts are contributing to the total, but there's no space where they all talk to each other. And then, we haven't normalized the conversation, I think, in America about mental health. Some people, there's a stigma attached to it. Like, oh, if I go see a therapist, I must be broken, or I must be weak, or I must be less than. And I think there has to be more dialogue about that mental. And we see it now with some of our athletes speaking more out about it. But I think the athletes aren't enough. It has to be us normal people, or people who actually are trying to actually figure out how to pay their bills every day. And not people who, bless their hearts, that's not their issue. But there's no normal, way too many of our communities, this concept of getting treatment for mental health issues is like, oh, you must be weak, you're less than. It's not a normal. And I tell people I want it to be as normal as when we talk about the score of last night's Braves game, or anything else we talk about. It just should be a normal conversation, but we don't have that. Unfortunately, by and large in America, we don't talk about the fact that we all go through things, whether you're a cardiac patient or you just go to a 9 to 5 every day. We have to, in my mind, we have to remove the stigma around going to see a mental health professional.
Yes. Thank you so much, Arthur. Thank you so much, Arthur. And that's a really good question that I will say is probably much bigger and deeper than we even have time to discuss today. And a lot of it, I'm sure, is going to be really a policy situation with what people financially are allowed with their insurance companies and all of that. So I think there's a lot of work to do in making mental health as important as the rest of our health. But that said, this is a perfect time to segue into our next speaker. So Dr. Vaughn, you want to say one more thing? I'm sorry.
I was just saying, thank you for having me. I don't have anything else. I think I've said more than my share.
And I see that in the chat, you added a website. So it looks like you have a little website we can visit to learn more and reach out to you. So thank you so much again.
Well, thank you all.
All right. So I am incredibly honored to introduce Jack Rayner, who is a friend of Georgia Transplant Foundation. I know Rebecca mentioned the couples weekend, and he facilitates those for us, which have been outstanding for anyone who's attended. But he's been working with transplant recipients and their families for more than 2 decades. So he's very experienced. And he is also a board certified clinical psychologist, practicing indicator. And we are all very excited to hear what he has to say today. So welcome, Jack.
Good morning, Deb. Good morning to you all. Thank you for the invitation to be here. It's interesting to be on a Zoom conference with all of you while I'm sitting in my study. So how nice is all of that? What I would like to do this morning for the next few minutes is to teach you. There is, because we have been in such an unusual time, there is fortunately now beginning to be social science data that is coming out about the mental health of the country. And there are some very practical things that I would like to speak to you about that may be useful, that may be helpful, and then we'll have some time for questions. I need to say up front that it is very, very, very troubling to me that a public health issue, the pandemic, has been translated into a political diatribe. I don't understand that. I don't have a great deal of acceptance of it. Other than this is a public health issue. And so I am making the assumption that all of you have been properly vaccinated, have been well able to manage your own self-care. Folks with transplants, either on the way or post-transplant, already know about compromised immune systems. And so there is no real surprise that you have had to be very cautious, very careful, and properly hypervigilant to attend to your own health. Said and appreciated. What I know is that over the last 16 months, since the pandemic started, we have all been in a state, our entire society has been in a state of fight or flight. We were taught that. If you ever took a psychology course in high school or college, you got that from the get-go. You either respond with a heightened state of arousal, danger, danger, Will Robinson, and we go, uh-oh, what am I going to do? Am I going to fight it? Am I going to pursue it? Or am I going to distance from it and move away? That danger, danger, Will Robinson response is a place of crisis. And it was designed for us neurologically and physically to stay at a very, very short time where we went up, all of our central nervous system blasted all of the different cortisols, adrenalines, chemicals, and things to get us busy and activated. And when the crisis left, was abated, we were then meant to lower our sense of arousal so that our autonomic nervous system could go, this is better, this is easier, you're all right now, you've taken care of whatever the crisis was. We've been in this hyper-aroused place now for more than a year, which has been really quite interesting because it's caused for all of us a very, very complicated set of place in the world, how we feel, how we think. It's for some of us have compromised beliefs, but it has certainly been behaviorally really quite activating. And so what we are finding now is that there have been some real interesting responses physiologically, which translates into the psychological, to how we're going to take care of ourselves. I thought, given February or March, that I was in pretty good shape, but then I began and I have been working as an essential worker and have maintained my practice throughout the course of this entire pandemic. I live between two communities. I live in Atlanta during the week and in a little small rural Western North Carolina town on the weekend. But essentially, I've been in a monastery just between two places now throughout this pandemic. And so I started going, I'm not sleeping well. I'm not thinking as well as I should. I'm an avid crossword puzzle fan. I stopped being able to call crossword puzzle cues and answers back and forth. I thought, uh-oh, Jack, 66 years old. You're either depressed, you're getting demented, or you have an anxiety disorder. And I thought carefully, I thought, well, no, you're not depressed, because depression is characterized by numbing. And I'm certainly not numb. I am just still in the danger, danger, Will Robinson place. And I thought about anxiety, because all that does is cause you to spin. And I thought, well, I'm not spinning because I'm staying busy. And I thought, great, that leaves dementia. Just my luck. I am on my way out. I was talking with friends about this, good researchers, who were saying, well, I feel exactly the same way. I'm having all sorts of problems that I'm just dull. I don't have as much motivation as I want. I can't focus. I can't concentrate. I'm more apathetic than I wish that I would be. I had said things like, I've watched everything there is to watch on Netflix. I don't want to see another TV show. All of that then was told and was understood by some researchers to be called languishing. It's not depression, it's not anxiety, it's got a really nice poetic word called languishing, which says just basically that. Because of this heightened state of arousal, physiologically, which then translates psychologically and spiritually, we are losing a sense of well-being. We're duller to our sense of joy, to excitement. We've got a lowered sense of motivation. We've got an loss of ability to focus and to concentrate, and then become a bit more apathetic. So if that isn't the case, then I got the second dose of the vaccination and I went, great, I can come out to play now. And I was able to do that for a period of time, but now here we go with the Delta variant, and we have now moved back into that heightened state of arousal and all of the current concerns that leads for the management of our health and well-being. For those of you who have had a transplant, you have lived with this for quite a while, much before the pandemic. You have already known about that sense of being particularly attentive to the way that you think, the way that you feel, the way that you believe, and then how that's going to translate into the way that you behave day to day to day. The entire world now is in the place that many transplant folks and many folks who have had autoimmune illnesses find themselves, having to be very careful and very thoughtful. And that has led to this whole experience of languishing. So what do we do about it? Here we are one more time. We're in a mess. Well, it's going to be interesting because the researchers have said, well, if there is such a thing as languishing, where we really do dull to our experience, then what are we going to do? There is a way that we can move back toward wellness, which is called flourishing. So we've got languishing as dullness, flourishing as an ascension back into wellness. That's various degrees of the ways that you will define happiness, life satisfaction, mental health, physical health, and finding a way to give meaning to your day and to have some sense of purpose. So that's the teetering point that we have been living with now for several months. And I expect, because of the uncertainty of the time right now, and because there is as much unknown as there is, that we are going to live on this point for a while. I'm thinking at least through the end of the year, perhaps on into next year. When Deb asked me to speak with this group, I thought, oh, great, because I'm doing some writing on this whole sense of how are we going to nurture our return back into the community. And so now what we've got is, how am I going to be able to do that? And what I would like to do is to talk, because many of us are feeling edgy still. We're not real sure how to come back together, how to find a way to be with others, how to take care of ourselves. It's very interesting. I went Thursday night to see Hamilton at the Fox. Me and 4,995 other people. We all were masked. We walked into the Fox. There was a big sign about every 30 feet or so. It said, keep your mask on. We will help you to stay safe. And then right behind that sign was a second sign that said, don't complain. I thought, yes, that's very good. Now, was it pleasant to sit for 4 hours in a mask? Hot? No. But was it something that I was willing to do because that is the way that we are proceeding with some degree of safety? Absolutely. That's what you also will begin to learn is how are you going to define your own sense of safety and move through the world? So what do? How do we re-engage with others? That's the question that may be a bit premature today in terms of the entire pandemic response. But there are specific markers that may have some value to you as you consider how you are going to do that. Day to day, there are decision points that we have to make that typically when we are in a lowered state of arousal, we do automatically. Because of the pandemic, and therefore, because of your particular need for the transplant care in the course of the pandemic, then you are going to have to make extraordinary decisions on a fairly regular basis. Now, we know some of the basics. You know all of the things that you've always heard. Physical activity helps. 30 minutes, get outside, do cardio 3 to 4 times a week, eat well, go for the good green leafy things. I think they're called vegetables. I'm not sure. I'm more prone to go for those hard orange things that are called Cheez-Its and Cheetos, which is one of my basic food groups. But we'll take what we can get. Now, there are other specific ways that can help for us all to recharge our emotional and cognitive batteries and to help us to reorient to a sense of fulfillment rather than diminishment, to a sense of purpose rather than a sense of floundering, and to a sense of happiness rather than a sense of dulling to experience. So I want to teach you what the research now is saying. And again, this is hot off the presses. This is all good data that some of these very smart social scientists have been gathering since the beginning of the pandemic. So I hope it's agreeable that I talk with you and that I don't put you up on a shared screen that's got PowerPoint slides. That I can't do that. So you get my big mouth, and so hang with me if you will. 5 suggestions of the ways to begin to reorient to what your normal is. Normal is defined by what most people do. Well, I'm not a real big believer in that because I live a fairly unconventional lifestyle. I think everybody's got their own eccentricities, their own idiosyncrasies. And so we're going to talk just about general foundational ways that we can move to return to a sense of rhythm. First, go off screen. How lucky are you to be sitting here on a Zoom meeting and I'm going, go off screen. What the research says is that social media feels relaxing, but in truth, what it does is it drains mental resources. It really is like eating Cheetos. It does nothing to provide us any type of psychological nutrition. Feels good, tastes good, but after a while, you're going to go, that's not so great. If you are looking to rejuvenate, to gather a sense of energy, to gather a sense of well-being, put your devices aside so that they are out of sight and out of mind for a designated period of time every day. Now, there is no best designated period of time of day. It could be whatever you define for yourself. But what the research is saying is get rid of all of that and use all of your cognitive, affective, and spiritual resources in a way that is not defined by an external device. So there's number one. What are you going to do about Facebook? What are you going to do about Zoom? Think about it, put it to the side. Second, spend time outside. There is a fair amount of data that is saying that the experience of nature, simply going outside and being amidst nature, restores cognitive abilities that are depleted by everyday activities. Isn't that interesting? The simple act of being outside and in nature is going to give us more than a metaphorical breath of fresh air. A day at the beach, a walk in the woods, stroll along the urban beltline. What that's going to do is reorient your brain neurally toward replenishment. What you're going to find is that when you are out and wandering in nature, there is a reduction of the release of stress-related chemicals in your brain. If you go outside and move through the world in a solitary way, what you're going to find is that automatically and organically you focus on smaller new things that are found in natural abundance. Fun fact to know and tell. And so nature does indeed heal. 3, choose the right kind of downtime. Everybody needs a break over the course of the day. It depends on the type of work that you have been doing. Find something that will take a break for you that complements the type of stress that you are in. Downtime does not equate to doing nothing. Downtime says, this is how I am going to engage in an activity that feels soothing. And what I'm going to do is quieten that heightened sense of routinized activity in the course of the day. For me, a downtime, as I have mentioned earlier, are crossword puzzles. I really am trying to escalate and elevate my capacity to do New York Times puzzles. I can get through Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday. That's where I move into the abyss. And so I am hoping that I can really begin to acquire better skill sets. And that for me is great fun. That does mean that normal is going to be something different. For those of you who have had a transplant, you already know this. For those of you who are awaiting transplant, that's what you're going to hope for, is that something will be different post-transplant. And so we can't expect for things to snap back to normal. People are saying, I cannot wait for this to be over. It's like, well, all due respects, we may move from a pandemic to an endemic state. We hope that over the course of time, as the science and as the technology continues to advance and helps us to understand the COVID virus is more manageable, but we are still going to be changed. We are all going to be changed. Handshakes are one. I don't know that I will ever go back to shaking hands on a regular basis. I don't like fist bumping. That feels combative. I was in my church February a year ago, and the priest suggested, oh, just tap somebody on the foot. And I thought, I'm not kicking anybody. That's not going to happen. So what I found was that the way that I could make contact with people in a social way, I started with the Vulcan, live long and prosper. And so I went for Spock. Then I went for Zen, Namaste. And what I have come up with now that suits me best is jazzy hands. Hello, how are you? And so all of that is a new normal for me. I shook hands with a fellow last week, hadn't seen him in months, and we stuck our hands out, grabbed our hands, and did this. We just stopped. We didn't shake. We just went, I don't think this is right, is it? And we went back and backed up a bit. We laughed. We commented on how awkward the physical contact was. And so I said, here are my 3 ways. And he said, have you lost your mind? I said, what little I had. Yeah, it's long gone. But better than swapping Delta variants. Thank you so much for asking. So your new normal, you're going to have to think about what's right, what feels genuine and what feels congruent to you. So I would suggest, and what the research is going to say, is that this is a place, rather than this hyper sense of arousal where you're going, I'm in danger, 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 Will Robinson, is that to establish a new sense of normal is that you look before you leap, and that you take a step back and go, what's the best way for me to proceed here? I'm not in any type of imminent danger, so how am I going to do this? Research also says is ease back in. You're going to find this and you're going to hear this a fair amount in the transplant process. Post-transplant, check in with your personal stress, check in with your satisfaction levels. I was on the last of Dr. Vaughn's talk and heard the conversation about mental health. No, mental health is not primary with a transplant. It does indeed, though, have an organic rhythm to it. And there is a real sense that you just go gently and that you relearn and refocus and make intentional decisions about how you're going to oh, I've lost my word. See, I'm telling you, I'm still languishing. How you're going to move through the day. Think about this sense of languishing as a low-level illness like a cold. Recovery is going to take some time, and so be careful with yourself and take your time as it proceeds. Now, so we come to a new normal. I don't know about you, but one of the new normals in the city of Atlanta, which I am not fond of, is people have forgotten how to drive. We are with people who are driving, forgive my profanity, like bats out of hell. I never hope to see people moving and swinging in any type of more dangerous types of ways. Defensive driving has just been taken off of the map. And I think that that's probably one of the social results of how we have all been as anxious as we have. We'll hope that that new normal gets reestablished at some point in time. Some of the research that we have seen, and this goes more psychologically than the behavioral things that I just spoke of. Because of the reemergence of this uncertain time, we are more prone to focus on life hassles than the good and the easy points during the day. And so it is natural when we do live in this heightened state of that we look at all of the things that are causing irritation, that are causing tension, that are causing knots, rather than the good and the easy points of the day. There are strategies for reorienting this. What I like to do is just to tell you this. Again, some of these sound like, well, if life gives you lemons, make lemonade. That is fairly superficial, but there is some utility to some of these points. The first is focus on gratitude. One of the most widely studied of all well-being activities involves the exercising of gratitude. It has been taught, has been proven, that when we are in the presence of our own sense of gratitude, and if we can, listen to this, this is really, really easy. 3 times a week, write down 3 things that you're grateful for. Simple exercise, 3 times a week, 3 by 3. 3 times a week, you write down 3 things that you're grateful for, such as, I'm grateful that I still have hair. Foolish things like that. I'm grateful that I can operate my computer. Easy things. But what you're going to do is that if you do that 3 times a week, 3 things 3 times a week for a month, then what you will do is move and reorient to a sense of happiness, to a sense of positive observation. It will relieve any type of symptom of depression, and it will improve your sleep. Now, while the research doesn't go far enough to suggest that simply doing that is going to relieve complicated problems, what it will do is, if we are in the presence of that sense of gratitude, it's going to help us to reorient away from the sense of uncertainty and more to find ways to deal effectively with life hassles. And so the exercise, the 3 by 3, is a very good psychological exercise to go toward gratitude. Which brings me to the next point, the psychological point for reorienting. And that's to carry out regular acts of kindness. There is a great deal of psychological and social science literature that says conclusively, enacting kindness has significantly positive effects on personal well-being. Let me say that again. Enacting kindness has significantly positive effects on personal well-being. And these are small, out of the ordinary kindnesses towards others. Now, what the research also says is that you have to plan altruism, that you really do have to decide how you are going to enact that sense of kindness. And the planning itself and the deliberate intention to do good to others improves the sense of happiness, and it is going to move towards a dispensational sense of finding a sense of goodness and a sense of safety. Interesting, huh? Now, that is known, again, the word is altruism, we hear it. Altruism is defined as the well-being of others is equally, if not more important, than the well-being or the survival of the self. And so altruism involves selfless acts or undertakings that put the welfare of others before your own. I was in the Publix last night with my grocery cart. I moved up, was in the line. Some fellow came up. He was not attending to me. He wasn't paying attention. He was not being aggressive. He just got in front of me. And I backed up. I thought, well, I'm not in a hurry. And he looked and he said, "You were here, weren't you?" And I said, "I was." And he said, "Oh, here, go right ahead." And I said, "I'm okay." He said, No, go right ahead. It'll make me feel better if you go back to your place in line." And I said, "Not only have you been kind to me, you have given me a teaching point for tomorrow morning at 10:45. He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "It's a long story. It's all right." So I checked out and got my veggies and my Cheetos and my Cheez-Its and so on. Now, there is also a sense that if we can savor the good, think about the word savor just for a moment. Think about that very, very good Italian meal that you had last week, that you could go and you can taste it again this morning. That's savoring. That sense of when we have been in the presence of an altruistic, positive, optimistic experience, we can recreate it. And what that will do is heighten our sense of focus on how we feel good. Organically, naturally, when things are tense, knotted, complicated, we are more prone to focus on attention. And it takes a cognitive override. We have to use our good brains to find a way to savor an experience. It doesn't have to be grand. You can savor, to use my food metaphor, the green beans that you had last night, or the best cantaloupe you had for dinner. Or I can savor having the very best cup of coffee in my favorite mug that I can find. And that I can look and I can go, you know, I know exactly where I was when I bought this mug, who I was with, what I was doing, how nice it was to be with them. And I have good coffee. That is a psychological reorientation experience that takes us to the immersion in a positive experience. Given the stress and the tension of this world right now, we need as much of that as we can get. And there's one more piece of this that I would like to say before I'll stop, and then we'll talk a bit, take some questions. It is not unusual at all, particularly with folks who have come into this sense of a pandemic with autoimmune compromises, that there are times that you become sufficiently anxious and depressed that you are going to need help. It goes with the territory. Pre-pandemic, the research said conclusively, it was an epidemiological study, said if you just ask 10 people off the street, 2 of the 10, 1 in 5 is going to say that they are having some type of emotional difficulty or mental health difficulty sufficient that they would want or need professional intervention. Now, depression is the most common. If you find that you become numb to your experience, numb like when you go to the dentist and the dentist, she will keep you from feeling pain, that's depression. Numbness doesn't stop pain, it just kind of puts it down. And so it is in your best interest, if you do feel that kind of depression, ask for help. Anxiety is when you get to that persistent, ongoing fight or flight response, even when there's no danger evident. We are now at the place, as you are with your own transplant journey, that you know where danger is pretty much evident. If you are feeling more anxious and you can survey the landscape and go, there's nothing really here. And if that experience of anxiety lasts for more than 2 weeks, don't hesitate to ask for help. There is a great deal of help that is available. I understand the stigma of mental health, mental illness, feeling vulnerable, feeling as though you are weak. But this is a crazy world, and we are in a very, very, very difficult, challenging time now. And if, again, the symptoms of anxiety or depression fluctuate too high to inhibit your activities of daily living for more than 2 weeks, that's a good time to ask for help. Okay, Professor Rayner, off my soapbox, willing to hear from you, would like to hear from you. Questions, thoughts, responses.
I have a question.
Yes.
I have a heart, I was blessed to get a heart. But I learned a lot about myself when I was in the hospital. My skin was very sensitive. I'm a diabetic. I have glaucoma. The heart is doing well, but now I feel like I'm like a hospital patient guinea pig because of everything else that's going on with me. I don't know exactly why I'm like that. I guess because of the sensitivity of my skin, but I just got over pneumonia. I don't go anywhere. Only place I did go was to church, I just feel like I'm just boxed in. I can't go outside. I can't do anything with my life. Like you said, there's interests I had. I love to paint, but now since I have glaucoma and I got this heart, my eyes are not doing that well. So I diamond paint, and then sometimes I'm out of focus. What can you recommend for a person like me that can't go anywhere and can't do much? Even though I wear my mask, I would double up on my mask, but I'm still getting all these issues with my life. It's like my life just shut down.
Yeah. Let me give you perhaps it is a bit of a vaguer answer, but I will give you the psychological piece of it. You pick what you are in charge of. Those things that you are out of control of, that you are helpless to, that are the changes that you have absolutely no bearing on, put those on the shelf. Just catalog them like you would putting a book on the shelf. Where you do have some degree that you can be in charge, that you can make a decision, that you can enact, then that's going to it will move you toward a place that may feel more, the psychological word is efficacy. The translation of it is mastery. It will help you to feel like your decision-making is yours rather than something that is outside of you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah, thank you.
Well, good luck with it. And you'll be able to do that. You'll go, what can I do? What can't I do? This is something that's a fairly organic process. And so good luck with it. I'm sorry that you have got so much loss.
Oh yeah, I'm still going through a lot right now. I got to go back. They found a cyst in my kidney. It's just one thing after another. My bones are weak. But when I go where the hospital I'm in Virginia, Lynchburg. But the Lynchburg hospital I go to, they can't take care of me. So I have to go 2 hours to Richmond to that hospital, which I was traveling 7 hours to come to Atlanta because that's where I got my heart from. But I'm originally a resident here in Virginia. So I'm still going through a lot. The heart is doing good. It's just the rest of me just won't catch up.
There are any number of complications that you are up against. And it may be that what you can be in charge of is whether you want your coffee black or with cream. But something that is that basic that you can make your decision on. Let me see if I can do this a bit differently. Do I want to go to Caribou or do I want to go to Starbucks? That gives you as much charge as you can have.
Oh, okay. I didn't think it that way. Thank you.
Good. Others?
I couldn't do sports. I couldn't get excited. So I was always.
Well, it sounds like we don't have a lot of questions. So I think that's great. Jack, it was so great. I know that, as a social worker and somebody who openly goes to therapy myself, I appreciate all of the mental wellness talks that you bring. They're just very helpful, just refocusing, remembering all the things that we can do. Some of it stuff we still know, but this was definitely helpful for me. And I hope you guys all definitely took a lot away from this as well.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you for the invitation. I hope that the day continues to proceed well, and I will wish you all the best that you can have for the day.
Thanks so much. You enjoy the rest of your day.
See y'all soon.
So before we take a quick break, we are going to split into two groups for our last session. So in a moment, there's going to be a link at the bottom of your Zoom screen to join a breakout room, but the breakout room is only for anybody waiting for a transplant or pre-transplant, or if you're a professional and you'd rather listen to the pre-transplant talk today, that's for you. The post-transplant group will just stay here in this room, so you don't actually do anything, but we are going to take a break to give a chance to make sure everybody gets to where they need to go, and so you can just run to the bathroom really quick. So we will, just as a quick reminder, keep the Zoom open once the doctors are done speaking. We'll just close the other breakout room, and then we can all chat and just have some informal conversation together. So at this point, we're going to see the breakout room option at the bottom. Again, please join it only if you're here to, if you're waiting for a transplant and you would like to hear the pre-transplant talk. And then we will get started probably, by 11:05 at the latest, maybe a little bit earlier if we're sure everybody's in the right spot. So just take a minute to do all those things, and we will still be here if you have any questions. So if you're not sure you're going to hit the breakout room, let's see here. I don't think there was a link to the breakout room. Did anyone get it?
Deb, at the bottom of the screen, it says breakout rooms.
Yes.
The bottom of your screen. So I guess people can just click that.
Okay, thank you. I do see 4 people have moved into the breakout room. So, so if you need help getting to the breakout room before we get started, you can chat me directly, or you can unmute yourself and we can move you. We just want to make sure everybody ends up in the right spot before we get started.
Just say your name out loud if you need to be moved, and I can move you.
Hey, this is William Holloway. I'm trying to get into the breakout room. I see the icon, but when I touch it, it doesn't let me open.
Okay, we can move you.
Okay. Do I hit join now?
Yes.
Okay, we'll give one more chance to go to the breakout room if you need to before we get started. Anybody here still that might need to go to the other session, just let us know. The other session will be talking about waiting for a transplant. This session is going to be talking about after transplant. Right, I guess we're good to go. What do you think, Rita?
Yeah, I think we're good to go.
Okay. All right. So I am going to introduce our next speaker, which is Dr. Robert Cole, and he is an advanced heart failure and cardiac transplant cardiologist with the Samsky Advanced Heart Failure Center. He received his medical degree and completed his cardiology residency and advanced heart failure fellowship at Emory University. He specializes in the treatment of heart failure patients who may require advanced therapies, mechanical circulatory support, and/or transplantation. In his spare time, he enjoys exercise, all things sports, a great meal, and spending time with his daughters. And we are excited to have him today. I got to meet him yesterday. We were having some Zoom troubles, which seemed to be resolved today. So welcome, Dr. Cole.
Yeah, can everybody hear me, I hope? We're good? Yeah, okay. It's nice to see some familiar faces in the room here that I haven't seen in a long time. By the way, I actually am in Toronto, which is weird. I had a trip up here for a meeting, and so I'm in a random hotel room in Toronto, but hopefully this is coming through okay. So yes, I used to be at Emory for a long time. I did all my training there, and then moved up to the Northern Virginia area for a couple of years to work at Inova Fairfax, and then came back to Atlanta about 6 months ago to start working at Piedmont. Again, nice to see some familiar Atlanta faces. I'm going to see here if I can start sharing my screen. Let's see. Is this showing up? All right, hopefully y'all can see this. What I'm going to talk about, given that I'm guessing most of you are post-transplant, these are things that you're probably already aware of, but I think important to make sure that everyone is. And that's sort of, what to expect after a heart transplant in terms of, why we do the things that we do. Sometimes they probably seem like a mystery. For example, why do I need 8 gallons of blood drawn every time I show up, and so forth. So we're going to talk a little bit about sort of expectations from a physician perspective of when I'm, taking care of a patient after transplant, what sort of goes through my mind, and how do we maximize the quality and quantity of life after a heart transplant. And so at any point, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to stop me. But again, a lot of this, many of you probably already know. So when we're talking about heart transplantation, we basically have 2 goals. One is to have you live longer, right? Number 1 goal is improving how long you survive. The other goal, obviously, is living better. It's one thing to survive, but it's another thing to thrive and survive well. And so anytime we're considering someone on the pre-transplant side, we want to make sure that we're offering an organ to someone who can live and live well. And the post-transplant side of things is, how do we make this happen? How do we get, our patients to live longer and to thrive? In terms of living longer, how are we doing? Well, we've come a long way. This gentleman here on the left is Christian Barnard. This was Time magazine in 1967. Many of you are probably familiar with his name, but he performed the first heart transplant in South Africa back in 1967 into a gentleman named Louis Washkansky. And you can see it was a success. He made the cover of Time magazine, but the patient lived about 18 days. So obviously a long way to go in terms of improving survival. A few years later, if you looked in 1970, the average survival after heart transplant was 1 week. Again, not exactly success. And, in the 70s, there was actually a lot of discussion around whether or not heart transplantation was actually a viable thing, whether or not we should keep doing it. And in fact, in the early 70s, the number of transplants sort of spiked and then dropped off precipitously because patients were not living longer. And honestly, it wasn't until the advent of cyclosporin, the immunosuppressant drug, that patients could start living longer and better. But for a long time, it was sort of considered science fiction and not a method to have patients live longer. Thankfully, there were surgeons, including a gentleman named Norm Shumway out at Stanford, who really believed in it and kept pushing the envelope until cyclosporin came around. And obviously now we're here today, 50 years later, talking about it. And when we talk about survival, survival, it's a relative thing. When when you're a healthy 18-year-old, if someone were to say, you've got about 15 years on average to live, that's obviously one perspective. If you're 80 years old and someone says you're going to live 15 years, that's probably a good thing after a heart transplant. Generally speaking, if you look at the most recent data, the median, what we call conditional survival after a heart transplant, is about 15 years. And we say conditional because that assumes that you make it through the most dangerous period, which, as we'll talk about, is really the first few months and first year. And if you get through that first year, the complications and the risk of things like rejection go down substantially, and in which case patient survival is improved. Now, median just means if you take all of the survival of every patient who's had a heart transplant, and you put a point right in the middle of it, that's the median. So I certainly encourage you not to sort of fixate on that number. We certainly have patients that I still see day in and day out. They're 20 and 30 years out from transplant. And this is improving. If you look every time data gets published, that median survival is getting longer and longer and longer. And it's important to recognize that, all of this data is sort of cumulative. So, patients who had a heart transplant in the 80s and 90s were less likely to live as long as those who now get them and have had them in the last 10 to 20 years. And so that number is continuing to improve every year. And so again, do not fixate on a 15-year number because there are so many patients that now are living longer. And I'll sort of highlight this gentleman here. I believe he, at least as of last month, was the longest surviving heart transplant patient in the US. He's now, he had his transplant on his 42nd birthday. And now he's 77 and doing well. And so again, just to highlight that many patients live much longer. Obviously, for those of you who have a heart transplant, also, whether you knew it or not, your chances of surviving 1 year prior to your transplant were very poor. And hopefully your physicians had those conversations with you, but transplants are reserved for patients who are very, very sick. And so, extending your life from what was certainly less than a year, in some cases, maybe even a week, and having this precious organ and extending it to, on average, 15 years or longer is a pretty tremendous feat. So in terms of living longer, we've come a long way since 1967, thankfully. And certainly 1970. And again, this number continues to grow. I feel like I have to replace my slides every year because we're continuing to do better and better for how long patients survive. Now, let's see here. I can get this to move. There we go. Now, how about living better? Because again, it's one thing to live longer, but quality of life is so critical. And we're not doing heart transplantation purely for living longer. We want patients to live better. And I think it's easy for physicians to have sort of a more objective view of what's considered living better. And sometimes we don't do a great job of recognizing, what's involved, how quality of life is affected by things other than whether you're short of breath or not. I think, there was some conversation in the last session about, I have this heart, but, I feel like I'm in the hospital all the time. I feel like a guinea pig. And, I think that's a big part of it. We sort of focus on, well, you don't have congestive heart failure anymore. Hurrah, you must be living better. But, we have to recognize that there's more to it than just having congestive heart failure or not. And, I've always, one of my mentors over at Emory back in the day, Dr. Andy Smith, has always said, getting a transplant is kind of like trading one disease for another disease. It's a disease that you can live longer with and feel better with, but it's still essentially a disease. You have this heart in your body and it takes a lot of work, a lot of medications, as we'll talk about. And it's hard work. Generally speaking, from a physical perspective, we anticipate patients feeling better, recognizing that that's not always the case. But generally speaking, most patients, and hopefully most of you on this, do feel better and live better than you were before. If you look in the news every day, there's a story about, someone who's had a heart transplant doing something amazing. And I don't expect anyone to run a marathon after the heart transplant, but just as an example, this gentleman, Kevin Cobb, ran a marathon after his. And I know I've seen patients that are, active in, Atlanta tennis and running and all sorts of things that obviously prior to a transplant can't be done. If you're not aware, there's, the Transplant Olympic Games that heart transplants participate in both nationally and internationally. Obviously, with COVID, a lot of this has probably been put on delay, but for what it's worth, there's going to be in Australia the International Transplant Games in a couple of years. So again, just to highlight that, we expect physically for patients to feel better, to be able to do things physically that they weren't able to do. And the data does show that if you look at after transplant, about 90% of patients self-classify themselves as what we call New York Heart Association Class 1. What that means is, when patients have congestive heart failure, we have sort of classes 1 through 4 in terms of your symptoms of congestive heart failure. Class 4 being more severe symptoms where even at rest you feel terrible. Class 1 being no symptoms, and so of congestive heart failure. So the vast majority of patients after heart transplant have no symptoms of congestive heart failure, suggesting that patients are living better. Again, recognizing that everyone's an individual, but on the overall global perspective, patients do feel better. And so living better, living longer, I do think we're accomplishing that. I do think we have a lot of work to do to continue to improve that, as many of you are aware. And also, as you're aware, as I mentioned, it takes a lot of work. You guys, it's a full-time job, just managing the medications, the visits, the biopsies, and so forth. And so the success in terms of longevity, success in terms of feeling better, it takes a lot of work, as you're aware of. The frequent blood work, I once tried to add up the total volume of blood that was drawn from a heart transplant patient in 1 year, in the first year. And it's unbelievable. You basically take out, half of your blood volume in the first year, and your body has to work to replace that. And I'm sure you feel like pincushions, just getting poked all day, every day, it seems like, certainly in the hospital and then afterwards. So there's a lot of blood work. Obviously, you're coming back and forth to clinic, oftentimes a lot more than you were before the transplant, just because it's such an involved process. And obviously, you go through all these procedures, and the heart biopsies, the echoes, the heart catheterizations. If you look on average in the first year after transplant, most patients have a heart biopsy 12 to 15 times. Some of you, I think I've probably done some of these on. Apologies if I left any scars, but there's so many procedures, so many visits, so much blood work. It's a lot of work to make this a success. And for those who, if anyone here has not had a transplant yet, it's important to recognize that just because you're getting this heart doesn't mean you go on to this path where you're not seeing a physician anymore. In fact, you're actually seeing them a lot more. And so it is a tremendous amount of work. It's a tremendous amount of pills, in many cases, a lot more than you were on before. It's almost like having, 3 meals a day of pills, it seems like. But they all serve a purpose, preventing rejection, having 2 to 4 medications commonly to prevent rejection, antibiotic to prevent infections because your immune system is so suppressed from the rejection medicines. It's very common, as many of you are aware, because of tacrolimus and steroid use, to have high blood pressure. Many patients end up on 2, 3 blood pressure medications. The steroids and the tacrolimus can cause osteoporosis and problems with bone health. And so oftentimes you end up on medications for that. Tacrolimus and prednisone also cause diabetes. And some of you may have had this experience. It's not uncommon to have a patient who does not have diabetes before the transplant and then afterwards develops it. And that's in many ways inflicted by us with the medications that we use. And so the pill burden is tremendous. The follow-up, the blood work, the biopsies, again, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but it's a lot of work, and it is a full-time job to have this kind of success. But all these things we do with a purpose. We're not intentionally tormenting you with heart biopsies and blood work and making you have 8 million pills. They actually have a purpose, and that is to prevent the major complications Why is it that the average survival is 15 years and not 30 years? What is it that can potentially limit how I can succeed and live longer? And there are, as you're aware, many of you may have experienced some of these, there are a lot of possible complications after. And interestingly, the complications that we worry about after transplant differ by how far out you are after your transplant. So, in the first year, we're very focused on certain things like infections and rejections, whereas out, 5+ years, we're focused on very different things. But there's, a handful of things that we really focus on and try to target. And that's what these medications are for. And we'll talk a little bit about these sort of in terms of the timeline of when these events occur. And that'll probably hopefully help you understand why we do what we do when we do it. If you look at what kind of complications can happen after the surgery, again, it differs by time period. We know that in the first 30 days, there we go. The first 30 days, it's all related to the surgery. We worry about surgical infections. You've just had your chest opened. There could be infections there. You've had 8 million catheters in your body. You probably felt like every hole in your body had a catheter in it at some point. And those things lead to infections. And so the most dangerous time period for surgical infections, obviously, is at the time of surgery. There is something called primary graft dysfunction, which is a devastating thing where a transplant gets put in and doesn't start working right away. And that happens, and some of you may have even experienced that. No one really fully understands why you can put a heart in one person and it works right away, and you put it in someone else and it doesn't. But it happens, and it's certainly less than 5% of cases, but early loss of the transplant is called primary graft dysfunction, and it is something that every time a transplant's done, that we face that possibility. Rejection, which is sort of a big, obviously, concern, and in the early days, the reason why patients didn't live long was because we didn't have a good way to control rejection. And rejection comes in two flavors. The one that we worry about most is called cellular rejection. That's where the T cells of your immune system attack your heart because it's a foreign object and it's not supposed to be there. And so your immune system attacks it. And the risk of that really is very much early and in the first year. Now, there is still some risk, but every year out after the first year, it diminishes tremendously. Because as robust as the immune system is before, obviously we knock it out with our rejection drugs, but also your immune system actually starts to learn to live with the heart. There's something called tolerance, where your immune system says after enough time, okay, this heart is ours now, and let's give it a break and try to stop attacking it. Now, it never fully goes away, which is why you will always be on some form of immunosuppression, but over time we can sort of lower the immunosuppression, and it's because your immune system starts to accept the heart and starts to have what we call immune tolerance to it to some degree. And anyway, that's why we do so many biopsies in the first year, because it takes a little bit of time for your immune system to do that. And then after the first year, as many of you know, the number of biopsies goes down, and that's because the risk of rejection goes down. Occasionally, we'll do a biopsy later, but I know when I was at Emory, we were doing heart biopsies all the way out to 7 years. That practice has largely changed. Many of you are probably having tests called AlloMap and AlloSure, which are ways to monitor for rejection through blood work, as opposed to needing a biopsy. And so thankfully that has changed a lot of how we do things. It's rare to see someone get a heart biopsy 7 years after their transplant in the absence of any major troubles. The other thing in that first year, because we worry about rejection so much, you're on a lot of medicines to suppress your immune system. That first year, you're also at risk for what we call opportunistic infections. We call them opportunistic because these bugs don't traditionally infect people who have healthy immune systems, but they use the opportunity of a weakened immune system to attack. And so things like PCP, which is a type of pneumonia, toxoplasmosis, all these sort of exotic infections that we don't anticipate seeing in someone with a healthy immune system can arise when the immune system's suppressed. And so during that first year, oftentimes you're on several pills to reduce that risk, Bactrim being the most common, dapsone, atovaquone, a variety of antibiotics. But that risk also dissipates after the first year, and so it's not uncommon to stop those. The next thing is sort of another type of rejection called antibody-mediated rejection. This is where, in cellular rejection, your T cells attack the heart, and antibody rejection, obviously you have antibodies that develop and attack the heart from that perspective. It's less common, but can be a serious complication. Actually, some of the work we did at Emory showed that the risk of this is a little bit higher in African Americans. And it can occur a little bit later than cellular rejection, even out to years 2 and occasionally after that. And so you'll hear us talk about drawing something called a DSA. And are we going to get DSAs on this patient? When are we getting DSAs on this patient? DSAs are just, we're testing for antibodies against your heart. And that's, it takes blood to do that. And so if you hear us chatting about checking a DSA, that's us saying, well, let's make sure there are no antibodies here against the heart, which could lead to that type of rejection. Again, the further out you get from transplant, that risk starts to come down. So in the first year, when we're thinking about living longer, the primary focus is really on rejection and infections because that's when you're at the highest risk for them. And so a lot of the things we do, the biopsies, all the blood work, all the pills are to prevent rejection and prevent infections. Now, after that first year or 2, our focus shifts. We still obviously have that in the back of our minds that rejection and infections are still important. They don't go completely away. But then we shift our focus on, okay, we've gotten through that tough first year. How do we improve long-term survival? We look at the long-term game after you get through that first year and what's going to limit that, what's going to limit long-term survival. And there's really 2 primary things that we focus on. First is this called transplant coronary artery disease, or CAV. You may hear us use the term CAV. This is one of the biggest limitations to long-term survival after heart transplant. It's a type of blockage that develops in the arteries of the heart. It's different from traditional coronary disease. Traditional coronary disease is, we think about cholesterol and plaque and things like that can lead to heart attacks. This type of coronary disease is different. It's more of an immune response. It's something that is exclusively seen in transplant patients. And if you look by year 5, about 30% of patients will have some coronary disease of the transplant. And by year 10, about half of patients will have some coronary disease. Now, not always bad enough to need stents or to cause major problems, but again, by 10 years, half of patients will have some of this transplant coronary disease. And it can be severe and it can be aggressive. It's the #1 reason patients get a repeat heart transplant, is because those coronaries can get narrower and narrower and narrower to the point where the transplant is no longer functioning. We can sometimes put stents in. We'll oftentimes switch medications around. So we know that drugs like sirolimus and everolimus, which are 2 anti-rejection drugs, can lower that risk. And so if you have a heart catheterization and we find some of this coronary disease, your physician may switch you over from something like tacrolimus to sirolimus or everolimus to help reduce the risk of that getting worse. But we focus a lot of our attention on that. This is why you get coronary angiography or heart catheterizations, or in some cases stress tests. And we do those every year because we know that, again, that is something that affects a lot of these patients over time. So when we're poking you in the arteries for these caths, that's what we're looking for. And we know that, again, after the first year, that's something we really spend a lot of time thinking about, because if we find it, we want to treat it early and aggressively. The other major thing that limits long-term survival once you get through that first year is actually malignancies and cancers. Because you are suppressing the immune system for a long period of time, your immune system's not able to detect abnormal cells in your body as easily. All of our immune systems help protect us from cancers, but if the immune system is suppressed, it is not able to do that as effectively. And so when we ask you about things like colonoscopies and dermatology visits and mammograms, it's because we know that the risk of cancer is significantly higher after a heart transplant. The most common being skin cancers. Hopefully all of you are seeing dermatologists regularly because skin cancers are incredibly common after a transplant, and they can be very aggressive. So oftentimes skin cancers in patients with normal immune systems will grow very slowly. You can kind of watch it for a while and say, I don't know what this is. And then eventually it grows and you finally get it taken care of. After a transplant, skin cancers can grow very rapidly. And so that's why we really say, please see a dermatologist. Have you seen a dermatologist? When are you going to see a dermatologist? To have your skin checks regularly, because things can be much more aggressive and grow faster. So skin cancer is by far the #1 cancer after a transplant. The others are lymphomas and leukemias. And importantly, just cancer in general, heart transplant recipients have a 4 times higher risk of the common cancers that we see, like colon cancer, prostate cancer, lung cancer. So we focus a lot on the skin, but there is also a higher risk for these other things. And so that's why we're, getting a chest x-ray all the time to look at your lungs to make sure we don't see any abnormal spots, doing the blood work to look for things. That's why we, say, hey, have you had your routine cancer screenings like colon cancer screening and so forth? Again, recognizing that once you get past that first year, that's what we start thinking about. And so, there's a reason why we do these things and ask you these questions, because those two really are the major limitations. That, if we could solve transplant coronary disease and do a great job of monitoring for malignancies, that 15 years will continue to stretch to 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and so on. And so that's why we focus so much on those two things sort of later, rejection and infection earlier. Now, in the background of all this, there are other medical problems that many of them are things that we create, unfortunately, with the things that we give you to prevent rejection. High blood pressure, as I mentioned, diabetes, and certainly kidney disease. Unfortunately, one of the most common side effects of tacrolimus and cyclosporin is that they are toxic to the kidneys, and many of you are aware of that. And over time, that toxicity just continues to accumulate in many patients, not everyone, but many patients. And so, before your transplant, the cardiologist, we obsess over your kidneys. Part of the reason is because we expect that after your transplant, we assume your kidneys are going to get worse. And so if your kidneys are already bad before a transplant, then we have to think about, okay, how do we get them better? Or do we consider something like a heart and a kidney transplant? Because we know that the drugs after transplant generally make that worse. There's certainly a few patients out there that, have been on these drugs for 20 years and their kidneys are flawless, but that's not the norm. And so the cumulative effects of things like diabetes, high blood pressure, kidney disease, this can lead to things like strokes and other complications. And so that's why we also are obsessive about monitoring your blood pressure, treating your blood pressure, having you check blood pressure logs, calling you constantly, asking you what it is, because of these other medical comorbidities. So with that said, how do I get the maximum benefit out of my heart? Well, generally speaking, we put hearts in patients that we think will thrive with it and who will stick to their medications and follow up. And so obviously, as you're aware, strict adherence to your medications and follow up. And God bless you, because I can't even remember to take my Zyrtec for my allergies every day, much less taking all the pills that you have to take after a transplant. And I recognize, and we all recognize that it's not easy, but obviously it's really critical because of the complications and because we have to control that immune system. And if we let that immune system, unleash into your body, then it can wreak havoc, obviously. So that's the number one thing you can do. Make sure you're getting your routine healthcare maintenance, seeing a primary care doctor regularly, for better or worse, having your colonoscopy if you're due for it. The routine health maintenance is really critical to that long-term survival, especially when we're thinking about things like cancer screenings, because we know certainly after that first year, it's really, really important. And as I mentioned, making sure, and we don't do a lot of excessive screening, I would say, but just making sure you're up to date with what's recommended for your appropriate age and gender. And also, having a heightened awareness that, if you're 5, 6, 7, 10, 15 years out from your transplant, and you're thinking about, all right, I got to get to 100, I want to live to 100, cancers are going to be one of the things that potentially can cause problems. And so being aware of that, if you're having unusual symptoms that are bothering you, having it checked out, make sure it's not something abnormal. See a dermatologist regularly. I can't, I'm sure you've all heard this, and hopefully you're doing a great job of making sure you're seeing a dermatologist regularly. Some of the most aggressive skin cancers I've ever seen can be really rapidly growing and can be very dangerous. And so make sure you're seeing a dermatologist regularly. And do your best to stay active and eat healthy. That being said, we gave you this transplant to enjoy life. And so you have to, enjoy every day with it. But trying to do your best to stay active and eating, a balanced diet, I think is important as well. With that, I think that's all I have. Just a little lighthearted humor here. So I guess, Deb, we can open up if anyone has questions.
Absolutely. I don't see any yet in the chat, but if you want to, you can chat if you don't want to unmute, or you can unmute and ask Dr. Cole a question. Thanks so much for that this morning. That is a little funny. That is a funny little, what is it, a little cartoon?
Yeah.
I love it.
Hi, Dr. Cole. This is Ketan Tonki. How are you, sir? Welcome back.
Hey, how are you? How are you?
Welcome back.
Yeah, thanks.
So my standard question, any new research on DSA versus the coronary artery disease relationship, or any solutions for that?
Yeah, I think so. That's a really good question. So, he's asking about the antibodies to the transplant and antibody-mediated rejection. And there's been some linkage from having antibodies to the heart to the development of this coronary disease, because interestingly, when you develop antibodies to your heart, they have, for whatever reason, they tend to attack the small blood vessels in the heart, which obviously the blood vessels of the heart, can develop coronary disease as a result. And there does seem to be a clear link to it. And the problem with the antibodies afterwards is, and if you look, about 30% of patients after heart transplant will develop some antibodies to the heart. Now, about half of those patients, those antibodies don't ever seem to do anything that we know of. And it's just something that we monitor. But in the other half, it can develop dysfunction of the heart, and it can lead to coronary disease, especially over time. The problem with the antibodies is it's really hard to get rid of them once they're there. We do a lot of different therapies, and some of you may have been through this, things like plasmapheresis, where we try to literally pull them out of your blood through a dialysis-like machine, a variety of medications to try to get rid of the cells that are developing the antibodies, which honestly is a form of chemotherapy. And they're really difficult to get rid of. And so a lot of the focus now in terms of the research into the antibodies is how do we prevent them from coming at all? because once the cat's out of the bag, it's hard to get it back in. And so there are actually active studies looking, there's one drug in particular that's being looked at up front. So patients who get a heart transplant immediately get this drug, and it's a monthly injection that can help prevent the development of antibodies. And that's actually a pretty large scale. I want to say 20 or 30 centers in the US are involved in that. The idea that using this new drug, will it prevent antibodies from developing altogether? And I think that's got to be the strategy going forward, is preventing their development, because once they're there, it's hard to get rid of them. But there is ongoing, a large clinical trial looking at that of a new drug. It's actually, interestingly, one of the drugs that's been used in some cases with COVID patients in the hospital because of its effects on the immune system. So hopefully that answered that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Joe Scott, I want to thank you for coming back to Atlanta. I really enjoyed having you at Emory.
Yeah.
And it's good to know that you're going to be at Piedmont now.
Yeah. Well, it's nice. It's really nice to have a good relationship. Obviously, all the guys over at Emory, Dr. Gupta, Laskar, Bob, the whole crew, I've stayed in touch with even after I left. So I wasn't sure if they were happy or annoyed that I was coming back to Piedmont, but we give each other a hard time. And obviously we all have the same goal, and that's to take care of patients and help people live longer and live better. And we communicate a lot. Dr. Laskar and I, obviously I make fun of him for his love for Clemson, but when we have challenging cases, we're discussing them regularly. Heck, even Dr. Vega called me for some advice a few months ago. So it's good to be back, and my heart's always kind of been in Atlanta. So I'm happy to be back, and certainly hopefully run into some of you, once things are out in public again post-pandemic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, any more questions?
Dr. Cole.
Yeah, hey Cheryl.
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
I was one of those that frowned when I heard you were at Piedmont, but I'm glad that you're back in Atlanta. We miss you. My question is about COVID vaccines, and most of us are getting the third vaccine already.
Yeah.
And do you think that's going to help us, or what is the general
Yeah, I
philosophy on
do.
that?
I do think so. And I obviously really encourage all of you, if you haven't, to go ahead and do that. We know obviously COVID, it's bad enough with a healthy immune system, but without a healthy immune system, which again is our fault. And I think that it's pretty striking, and when we look at obviously there's not a ton of data on this, but the studies that are out there do clearly show that that third booster shot has a major effect on boosting your immunity to the COVID. So I definitely encourage you to do it. There was some question about, could a vaccine lead to rejection, because in a sense you're kind of stimulating your immune system. And there have been some anecdotal cases here and there of patients who, after a vaccine, have had some rejection. I'll be honest, but it's not common. It's rare. It's so rare that everyone talked about it excessively because it was such a big deal. But the risk of COVID to a transplant patient far, far, far exceeds any risk of the vaccine. And so I encourage you to get it. And because your immune systems are suppressed, there is clearly a difference. The first two shots, obviously you get some immunity, but it's not the same level that someone with a healthy immune system has. And that's always been our worry, is that, because we're suppressing your immune system, you're probably not going to develop that same response. But when we look after that third dose, the immunity to COVID went up tremendously. And so it really does seem to have a really important impact. And I do encourage you to do it.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
We do have a question in the chat from Lisa. Lisa, you can unmute and ask your question if you want. I wasn't sure exactly what.
Hi, Dr. Cole. As a spouse of my
Oh,
husband,
spouse.
he just received his transplant on Monday. Should I consider getting that third vaccine?
Yeah, no, I think so. I would encourage you to. I think, we know that even, having the 2 vaccines, you're still at risk. Obviously, the Delta variant is a little bit more potent and tends to infect and can infect even immune patients who've received the vaccine. But I absolutely think you should. And in fact, I've written a few letters for spouses so that they could get that booster now, as opposed to, I think they're supposed to open it up to the general public in the next month or so. But, getting it sooner. I think, medically that's indicated. And if you need a letter, I'm sure one of the docs can write you one to say, look, she's a caregiver to, a transplant recipient. So, yeah, I definitely would.
Thank you.
Yeah. All good questions. All right.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
How soon after the COVID vaccine should you take any other type of vaccine, such as the flu or any type of anything else, or infusion or what have you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I always, this is one that I always defer to our infectious disease doctors because they're the smartest people in the hospital. But generally speaking, it makes sense that you do need a time period probably to allow your immune system to fully respond to the one vaccine before you get another. Even the COVID vaccine, it's been shown that really it takes 2 to 3 weeks before you truly get the maximum benefit from it. So, we do see a lot of patients that get the vaccine and get COVID, a week later. And that's because it takes a few weeks to really get the maximum benefit. And so, although I don't know that there's a black and white answer to it, I would generally say if you're getting the COVID shot, I would probably wait at least 2 to 3 weeks, if not a little bit longer, before getting any other type of vaccine, just because you really want your immune system to be able to focus on the one type of infection at a time. So conservatively, I would say at least 3 weeks, but maybe even 4 to wait.
Thank you. Would that be the same for infusions?
Which kinds of infusions? Like
any type?
I think it just kind of depends on what it is. Not necessarily, but yeah, if it's anything that's going to affect the immune system, potentially, yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you for sharing today.
Yeah, of course.
Dr. Cole, one more question. There was a study going on with the vaccine in relationship to DSA. They were measuring DSAs a month later after the first 2 doses. Has there any results been published yet?
Not yet that I'm aware of, but it is ongoing. And there similarly that was being done because and not just COVID vaccine in general, there's potentially a theoretical risk that if you give someone a vaccine, whether it's flu or otherwise, the way vaccines work is you develop antibodies to whatever you give them. And so there is a theoretical risk that stimulating an antibody response can lead to DSAs. And there were a couple of anecdotal cases of that, but the data that I'm not aware that it's out there yet, but I'm sure it'll probably be coming pretty soon, if not, but yeah.
All right. Any more questions for Dr. Cole this morning? All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr.
Yeah,
Cole.
look forward to seeing some of y'all down the road. And yeah, if you need anything, I'm in town. Let me know.
Awesome. And we hope you enjoy your stay in Toronto.
Yeah, it seems nice. It's 10 degrees cooler here. So.
Well, that's always nice.
Yeah.
Oh, you said it.
Oh, Cheryl, yeah. I'd love to join the Facebook group. Yeah. I'll send you a message. All right, everybody. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Cole.
All right. Thanks so much. And thank you one last time to CareDx for being our presenting sponsor. And thank you to Community, a Walgreens Pharmacy, and Synergen RX for being our virtual sponsors. And thanks for coming to